I'm about to start recording. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the virtual meetup for large-scale Scrum of New York City. This is one of our regular iterative events that we have. Today in the studio, we're honored to have two very special speakers and presenters, Ron Jeffries and Chet Henrickson. A few words about each of the gentlemen. Ron is one of the forefathers of XP. He has been involved in Scrum and XP for many years as an independent consultant. He has presented and written many papers on XP and Scrum. Ron is the proprietor of xprogramming.com, a highly ranked source of agile software development information. He is also specialized in helping Scrum teams to get to done. In one of his original, he is one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto, one of the 17 gentlemen that we know. Ron has coined the definition of Dark Scrum, and we are hoping that he will enlighten us today what he means by that. And now about Chet. Chet also has been a longtime friend of Ron. Chet has been involved in agile software development since 1996 as an independent consultant, coach, and trainer. Chet has been a member of the team that was involved in the Chrysler C3 project, where extreme programming was used. In the year 2000, Ron Jeffries, being Chet's companion, along with a few others, Chet wrote the book, Extreme Programming Installed. Chet is also the first signatory of the Agile Manifesto, and he has developed Scrum, Certified Scrum Developer Program for Scrum Alliance. And with Ron Jeffries, has taught this for quite a few years. Very first Certified Scrum Developer course was by them. Last year, Chet attended Craig Larman's LeSS training in New York City, and if he wishes, he may share a few, thoughts, some of the he had in the course. Ron and Chet work together and are very popular conference speakers, bringing an interesting mix of humor and deep knowledge to the crowds. I will let Ron and Chet pace themselves today. We're time boxed up to 12:55. And it's going to be an open conversation. Both Ron and Chet are almost co-located, but they're slightly separated physically, I think different rooms. They'll pace themselves and they'll take questions as needed. We have a few questions that were sent to me up front, and I will fill the air with those if there are no questions from others. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Ron and Jeff. Gentlemen, take it away.
Ron's disappeared. Hello, everyone. I don't see you.
That's weird.
Yes.
I guess when I tab off the picture, it turns off the video.
I would think so. Don't do that anymore.
All right.
So we thought we would mostly just handle questions from the floor. So if anybody has a question, please bring it up. Otherwise, we have a few that were collected over the past couple of days. But certainly anything that anybody online right now would like to talk about, we are more than happy to talk about pretty much anything you could imagine. So.
Yep.
Otherwise, we can do like hand puppets.
So that's a good way to frame it. So folks, the chat window is open, and I'm monitoring it. So everyone is on mute, and please remain on mute unless you want to make it vocal. And then I'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and then put yourself back on mute.
I don't know. Should we start with Dark Scrum a little bit?
Yeah, please. Why don't we do that? Why don't we prime the pump? Indeed. One of the questions that was submitted was, what are some classic signs of Dark Scrum, its reasons, or, you have coined the term. So why don't you talk about it?
One of the things that we've noticed is somebody going by with a giant truck. One of the things that we've noticed as we coach people and teach people and do certified Scrum developer classes and the like is that there are very many organizations that don't seem to understand even the elements of what Scrum really is about. And that they tend to work in a mode where they just have a huge list of things to do, and they come down and they say, do this, do that, do this, do that, throwing backlog items at the teams and just putting on the pressure to do more, do more, do more. We almost always see that in combination with a team that doesn't really have an increment. That at the end of every sprint, they don't have running tested code that like they're supposed to have. Excuse me. And the result of that really is just unhappiness and unproductivity. And ultimately, I think it leads to a general dissatisfaction with Scrum and with the ideas that are behind it. Everybody just says Scrum doesn't work, when in fact they've been doing what I came to call Dark Scrum because it's so counter to what Scrum is all about.
I think one of the things you can often see that folks are going down this path is the dysfunction that grows out of the what is called the daily Scrum. If you think about Scrum as a very powerful set of tools for self-organization, self-management, putting a huge amount of power into the hands of the folks who are actually doing the work. But if you flip that over and you take those tools and you use them from outside the team to beat on the team, Dark Scrum is mostly what we call that. And you, like I said, you see this often in what is supposed to be the daily Scrum, where instead of the team, the folks doing the work, getting together and spending a few minutes around self-management and planning of what they're going to do to get another day closer to their goal, is that you have folks who are managers of some kind, often called Scrum Master, who go in and serially interrogate the members of the development team, having them confess what they did yesterday and what they're going to do today, and maybe a little bit about what's in their way. You would think that the primary thing in their way would be this meeting, but I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to say that. And so you see this incredible oppression, that we have to show up here. We have no interest in what anybody else is saying, and therefore we're just waiting to give our little spiel and then zone out again, hoping for this meeting ends. If you think about what that meeting's about, it's about planning and the folks on the team who have a common goal getting together and trying to achieve it. If you really had a team who had a common goal, working together towards it, you could not keep them from having that conversation. And so you see teams where they're forced to do it. That probably tells you a huge amount of dysfunction is going on. And so that's kind of one of the first places I look when it comes to sniffing out Dark Scrum. I find it interesting as you talk about what you see in Dark Scrum, how many organizations confess. So yes, that's how we're doing it. That's how we're doing it. We're deciding what this team's going to do. We're telling them how much they have to get done every sprint, and then when they don't do it, we yell at them and do all kinds of things to try to get them to meet their commitment, which is probably the wrong word in many ways there, because they certainly did not own that commitment. Somebody else forced it on them. It's an imposed commitment, not an accepted commitment. So that's the things I kind of look for around Dark Scrum.
Now, the thing that I believe is that if a development team finds themselves in this kind of a situation, that their best hope is to have an increment of software available every sprint, because you at least have the possibility now of changing the conversation from here's this big list of things, you must do all these things, to hey, everybody, this is the software the way it is today. It really works. It's really tested. It's running. It has the 18 features you've given us so far to do. Can you think of a way that with 19 or 20 or 22 features, somebody could use this? So it gives you at least a hope of changing the conversation from from one of relentless pressure to one of a little bit more collaboration. As I look back on my career of successes and failures, the one thing I wish I had always done is have software available always for people to look at. I worked in a mode where, you know, you design and you develop and you code and you code and you code and you code and you test and you test and you test, and then at the end you release before Agile actually came out. And the thing that appealed to me most about XP and the other Agile approaches was it taught us that it is possible to have a running product that's very thin but completely capable at the beginning, and then add to it and add to it and add to it, so that when the deadline comes, you have something running instead of nothing running. So my certainly my primary interest over the past long while has been helping teams understand that if you have the software and you can put it in front of people, you at least have a chance of turning the situation into a more collaborative mode.
I think if you look at that kind of from the other direction, you see teams who say, okay, we've got our first 27 sprints all figured out, and now we're ready to start to work. That would be a classic giveaway that you're not actually doing this thing we're talking about. Because really what you want to have is, I figured out what we're going to do first, and then once we have that, we're going to look at it and decide what to do next. It will get us closer to having a product somebody actually wants. And if you have a process that's designed around learning, deferring that learning 6 months out into the future to say, okay, we know everything we need to know for the first 6 months, and we're not going to learn anymore, is probably a clue that you've gone down a bad path. And so when you see those sorts of things, you know that they're going down the wrong direction.
No, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Go ahead.
Please
No,
do.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna just frame that this is a pretty good, framing of what Dark Scrum is. Of course, there's so many different facets, so many different, so many different ways to exhibit dysfunction of bad Scrum or Dark Scrum. I was just gonna ask for some of the examples, some more classic examples you have seen, but see if maybe you were about to say this.
Well, they all look the same. They all look like a team who is being pressured for more and who doesn't really have anything to show. I don't think I've ever seen a situation I would call Dark Scrum where the team had an increment every sprint. Because if they do, you almost can't help but change your viewpoint from give me all this stuff to, you know, if I had one more thing here, I could actually use this. I cannot think of a case where a team in a dark situation has had software to show, which is why I think it's the core fix from the development side for this kind of a dysfunction.
And this sort of pressure puts us into pretty much of a death spiral, because the only way a team can survive in this kind of mode is to continuously reduce the quality of the product they were building. Because when you have more work than you can do and you're being held to some artificial deadline, the only tool at their disposal is the reduction of quality. Well, originally, first of all, you're going to reduce internal quality, and then you're eventually going to have to start reducing external quality. And as you reduce quality, it gets harder and harder to do more things. And so you go slower because of that. I have been saying for quite a long time that the only real use for things like velocity is as a trailing indicator of quality. If your team's velocity is dropping off, it's because they did bad work a month ago. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we can't go back a month ago and fix it, but we can recognize that we're going down that way. And so you want to avoid that. You want the team working at their best pace over time, delivering as high quality as you can stand. There should be no limit to how much quality the product should have. And in fact, we often get the other, which is quality decreases. And I think that's a a sign of things gone wrong.
Almost sounds
Now,
like
of
the
cour-
magic toolbox of bad code, untested code, spaghetti code, which deteriorates quality.
Yes, yeah, and you see that all the time. And someone once told me that the average IT shop spends 50% of their time dealing with defects, which implies to me that they spend the other 50% of their time putting defects in.
Sounds ironic.
must be true. Now, of course, when we look at larger organizations that are trying to scale, and organizations trying processes like LeSS and other worse processes, the situation can get more tricky. Commonly there, a thing that we'll see is organizations that have not really divided themselves up into a feature-focused collection of teams, but instead a series of teams, one of whom delivers to another, who delivers to another, who delivers to another, which puts basically all the teams in a mode where they can't really deliver working software, where all they can deliver is their component that goes into some bigger thing. So I think that when it comes to trying to do agile things in the large, if you must do them, and as Craig Larman teaches, you really don't want to do this if you don't have to. But if you must do that, I think you need to look very seriously at the advice to focus almost entirely on feature teams and as little as possible as on infrastructure and general purpose software teams.
And this, of course, challenges the organization to learn how to do that kind of work, because you still have to have infrastructure. You still have to build APIs. You still have to do those things, but you have to learn to do them in a different sort of way, one that allows us to have a product increment at the end of every sprint that has just enough of those back-end things to work. No more than you need and no less than you need. Because if you have too less, it is not going to work. And if you have too much, then you've done work that is speculative. And now you have a chance of having only gotten it partially right. And you have costs associated with going back and changing it, which people don't want to spend. And so you have a system that's built on top of the wrong foundation. The way you discover the right foundation is you build it as you're building the rest of the product. And that becomes a challenge for teams who have not learned how to do that yet.
So, Chad,
So, yeah.
thank you for this perspective. So let me ask you this question. That's what troubles me too. Do you think, and I might be anchoring you to my personal view, I hope not too much. You oftentimes see, you walk into the organization and obviously they have been exposed to some initial learning of Scrum, but what it appears sometimes is that the very core fundamental understanding what Scrum is not there. So from a get-go, people learn about what Scrum is from a wrong source. So they don't get it from the authentic source. So what they learn, so it's almost like it becomes their second nature. They think this is okay to have a proxy. They think it's okay to have, single facet, bunch of workers on the same team handing over stuff, from queue to queue. So it's almost like for them, it's a second nature. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you feel that? I mean, you've been training for decades, right? So I'm curious to know what your experience is.
I think, Ron, and my experience has been since the very beginning that when we show people how we work at all levels, one of the most common reactions we get is we did not think that's how that worked. We got it 20 years ago when we started teaching people how to pair program and do test-driven development. They would say, I didn't think that's how it was supposed to be. We were doing it a way that was different, because you can't learn these things by reading. You have to learn them by doing. And that's why, like when we came up with Certified Scrum Developer, it was putting people in a situation where they had to do these things in order to succeed. So they were able to taste what it was like. Without that, it's hard to understand. The challenge, I think, is getting folks to concentrate on what it is we're supposed to be getting out of this. What are the goals we're trying to achieve? Ron and I have created, along with Ann Anderson back 20-some years ago, a little simulation that I still use in my training today. And Ron, if he did anything, would still use it, which is motivating around why are we doing this? We're doing this in order to get value faster. That's the reason you do any of this stuff, is to get value faster. And so you have to take that and balance all the things you might do against that goal. What do I have to do in order to get value faster? And you look at simple value stream analysis of a standard process, and you see that all kinds of things have to happen before you get to value, which tells us that that value stream has to be reconfigured to take out the roadblocks and to get value faster. And once you get value faster, then it becomes, how do I get that consistently, which means I have to change how I do work as well. And so you should always think about what it is we're trying to achieve. That we're not here just to do the Scrum kabuki. We're here to get the thing Scrum promises us, which is the ability to get value faster, to be able to change direction quickly. We're not doing it just so we have a daily stand up in a respective for 20 minutes every 2 weeks that could be recorded and played back, because it's the same one every time. We have to change things in order to get different results. I don't remember what the question was, but I've talked
well,
long enough.
do.
Okay.
I do. And I do agree that what we see on the ground is people who mostly seem to not get it, who have somehow gotten the wrong impression about Scrum. What's most confusing and concerning to me about that is that there are 1 million certified Scrum Masters, which means that there are 1 million people who have heard the word directly from somebody who understands pretty much what Scrum is, and yet it is all watered down and gone strange when you get out into the field. Now, it's difficult because the average Scrum Master is probably not a vice president. They're probably somewhere between a very low-level manager or a business analyst or something. It's difficult at that level to come in with the ideals that you've only learned in a 2-day class last week and somehow bring all of that to bear on your organization, because you've got the weight of all these other people who think they know what Scrum is, or even not knowing what Scrum is, hate it. And so I think that they are kind of swimming upstream when they come in out of a class like that. That's the reason why there is all kinds of additional training available from the Scrum people. That's why programs like the LeSS program have deep training, and lots of it is in hopes of getting these ideas understood. But as Chet says, when people first see it, they're like, I didn't know it was supposed to be like this. And I think that applies at all the levels, not only just at the programming level. I didn't know you could program like that, but at the operational level of running a Scrum team or running a group of Scrum teams. Until people have actually experienced what it is like not to try to drive the team, but instead to draw out of the team what they can do, not to tell the team what to do, but to tell the team what is needed and let them figure out what to do. Until people have experienced that way of working, they don't believe it. And I think, most people have not been managed in a Scrum style. Most people have not been managed by a great leader who totally empowered them. Most people have been managed by somebody with a whip. And so they kind of think that that's the way it's supposed to be done. And I wonder whether most managers don't suddenly become managers, one morning when they, used to not be a manager the week before, and they really don't know how to do it. And they are afraid of how to do it. And between trying to tell people how to do the work because they used to know how to do the work and not really knowing how to manage, I wonder whether they don't kind of lock themselves into ways of thinking and ways of management that make a lot of what we talk about just sound like pie in the sky, just sound like, oh yeah, that'd be really wonderful in heaven or in the clouds or something, but in the real world here where we work, that stuff will never work. So I think it's an incredible and mostly unsolved concern with Scrum, both at scale and not at scale, in that people literally cannot conceive of this way of working. So many people cannot conceive of it. One of the interesting things you see happen is that when people go through Scrum training and begin to learn and begin to like it, and maybe even in their dev organization things work rather well, and they get a sense of how good this could be, you see a fairly high percentage of people who exit from whatever big company team they were in and either go into helping other people do Scrum or join a small company team that's trying to do it because they've experienced it. Meanwhile, I think the people back at headquarters are all like, I don't know why these people are all quitting because we're doing Scrum, they want to do Scrum. So I think it's a very large unsolved problem that is, in a way, it's common to all ideal methods. It's common to our theories of democracy. It's common to our understanding of religion and philosophy. It's like, it's all very good if you do it, but nobody's ever lived that way, and so it's hard to see how you really would make that work. And it's a tough problem.
So, I was just going to quickly reflect. So this is something that Chet mentioned really resonated. So you're right. We have like a gazillion of Scrum Masters. We have trained and certified. And I heard more often than not, people walking out of training courses saying, well, I just came out of a nice honeymoon. Now I'm going to have to go back to my daily marriage, right? So I think this is like a bifocal, bilateral problem. On one hand, we may have people that have gone through training and certification without any genuine intent to learn and change. And there are other folks that actually have gone through training with a genuine intent to learn and change. However, once they get back to their daily reality, they realize they just hit their heads against the brick wall, and
Yep.
almost like they
That's
lose
right.
faith, right? I mean, there's only one time you can, make that first impression on someone, and their desires, their aspiration has been ruined. So I'm going to dovetail of this, first question, which turned into a pretty nice elaborate conversation.
We've been doing this a while.
Yeah, I can tell. So, Ron, actually going back to you. So back years ago, I think I remember, you probably don't remember, I asked you about your views on scaling in general, and what do you think of organizational agility overall? And I think you kind of gave me the ironic answer, hey, I don't like helping large organizations. I like helping small people at large organizations. I don't think you remember your own quote, but I do. So that's what you said. I like helping small people in large organizations that are generally.
I don't think I would have said small people, but I like helping small groups.
Probably maybe that.
I am in fact overall very negative about scaling Agile. I think that the record bears me out, that particularly when we look at some of the schemes like SAFE, God save us, we see organizations that think they want to be Agile and they do horrendous, not very good things in the name of a method which could be applied well. I mean, it would be possible to do SAFE well, I think. If Chet and I, when we went through the SAFE course, we figured we could run a SAFE organization, and we would be ticking off all the items on their flip charts, but we would be doing it in an Agile fashion, and we understand that. But if you don't understand it, you cannot. I believe that corporations were designed to be impervious to change. They are designed to last forever. And that means that when the world changes around the corporation somehow absorbs that and mostly doesn't change. Even if you look at auto companies, all the auto companies now are making electric cars. Well, they resisted making electric cars very well compared to this new company that just popped up and said, I think I'll just build an electric car. The corporation resists this kind of change. The corporation is organized to be hierarchical, and it is a rare corporation that will change that. They do exist. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm pretty pessimistic about large scale agile. What I like, and I mean it's mostly because I like programming, is I like working with a development team and saying, okay, guys, how can we, whatever our environment, whether we're a waterfall company or a Scrum company or a LeSS company or whatever company, how can we make our situation healthier? How can we make ourselves more productive? How can we make ourselves happier? Because I'm really much more interested in making, in helping workers be happy than I am in helping managers be happy.
I had some conversations at the beginning of the year with a company here in the Detroit area who said they wanted to transform to be more agile. And I told them what I thought they needed to do in order to get started. And ended up not getting the job to work with these people. I mostly didn't care, but I did not get it because they wanted a roadmap to follow. They wanted here's what we're going to do this week. Here's what we're going to do a month from now. Here's what we're going to do 2 months from now, and on this path. And you know, somebody not long ago said that when you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're trying to get to, any map will work. And so they wanted somebody to come in and sell them a map. And, you know, Gene, and I know, and Ron knows that start down that path, the first thing you have to do is figure out where you are. Because if you don't know where you are, nothing matters. And you got to figure out what direction we want to go in. Maybe the general shape of where we'd like to be down the road somewhere. And that how we're going to get from here to there is going to be unique to us. And most organizations don't seem to want to go down that path, that they want a cookie cutter approach to enlightenment, and one doesn't exist. They expect you to snap your fingers and do something. I have been saying now, probably the most clever thing I've ever come up with, which is that it took 40 years for the Israelites to change enough to get to the promised land. That's organizational transformation at scale. It took 40 years. And they had a better coach than any of us are going to have on our journey to the path to where we're trying to get to. And so we should expect us to take longer than that, perhaps. It's going to be a generational change in order to actually achieve something.
That's interesting. That's a funny analogy.
Yeah. 40 years, you know, and if you can find a coach as good as that one, give us a call, you know. The other thing I also say is that you should not enter the Daytona 500 unless you actually know how to parallel park. Because if you can't do it here, the basics of what it takes to do this work, trying to do it at a grand scale is just absolutely ridiculous.
So I'm getting slightly, I'm not emotional, but very sentimental about what you just said, Chet. So more often than not, we see it isn't, and I agree with you with Ron as well. So trying to scale, you know, it's a self-fulfilled prophecy. If you don't understand where you're coming from, trying to scale something that may be already dysfunctional, it's ridiculous, right? You're going to be scaling dysfunction to the power of. But I wonder what your thoughts are on this. So more often than not, we see companies that haven't implemented healthy Scrum or Kanban or anything that is basic, rudimentary, simple at single team level. Yet they're trying to implement these humongous, heavy, unwrap and install monolithic programs that are, you know, they look very nice in the deck for sure.
You can make a lovely PowerPoint, yeah.
Yeah, but so, you know, I don't want to.
Yeah. No, Ron and I have been fired probably more than once for telling the folks we're working with that what you're doing now isn't Scrum. And you shouldn't think about how you're going to scale until you've actually fixed this thing right here. Let's change our view of how we're going to work. And understanding that this team is different than the team down the hall, and what they do may be different than what these folks do. You have to understand that part of agility is that you're not going to have the same cookie cutter approach everywhere in the organization. It's going to be different because the people are going to overwhelm anything else. And so you have to understand that people are the enabling factor around all of this. So.
Yeah. One of the things that's worth taking a look at, I think, is the notion of agile fluency, which is a product of James Shore and Dan Larson. And while I'm not here saying you need the product, I am just saying that what you want to do is look at the philosophy that they espouse, which has to do with learning to do the fundamentals. That before a team can actually ship software roughly in a time sequence and a flow that is consistent and predictable, there's no sense trying to scale that up. And so if you just take a glance even at the very top levels of fluency, you'll see again this idea that if you can't do the basics, there's really no point in going to Daytona.
Nice analogy. Both of them, actually. The 40 years and the Daytona. I'm doing a quick time check. We got 36 minutes past 12. We can skip there are a few previously submitted questions. I'm going to just park them for a minute, guys.
Okay.
A few that came through, there's a lot of back and forth between people on the bridge, but there's one question that came in first. Maybe you can quickly address it, and we don't have to be very long on this. Data science and agility. Can you help me explore how to use Scrum and Agile mindset in the data science context? So this may not necessarily mean that it is only data science work, or maybe data science work as a part of Scrum, but take it for whatever it's worth. What are your thoughts?
I'm happy to say that I know so little about data science that I have nothing useful to say about that.
Okay.
And that everything I've learned about data science, I learned from Ron.
Answers the question.
So we would like to just not answer that question.
We wish we knew enough to say something about that, but since we don't, anything we would say would be less than helpful.
Cool. I would be biased if I offered my view, because I've worked with teams that try to implement data science as a part of their Scrum. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But since it's not coming from you, I will not pollute the air.
Okay.
I will move on to the next one. The problem I see is that the Agile movement is mostly silent about how to do good business. And it leads to problems on the team level, like team not trusting the product owner because they don't know what is valuable, etc. And their Scrum Master don't know how to teach them either. So Chet and Ron, should Agile be more vocal about tools, methods, etc. for doing good business? So I guess the question is, should Scrum be more explicit about, and we know Scrum is very implicit on it's an empirical process, right? But there's a question about explicit use of, I guess, tools and methodologies or methods. What's your take?
Well, here again, the things, the circumstances on the ground are going to be different place to place. The Agile Manifesto was a point in time, and the best ideas that we had then. I think perhaps the most important part of it is the manifesto is the idea that we are continuing to learn new things. And so those folks out there who are learning these kinds of things should contribute this to the body of knowledge. I think it's very vitally important that a team understand the problem that are trying to be solved. As Ron and I have been thinking about how we would do XP today, and Ron's written some of this up at his website, which is now ronjeffries.com. You'll see that we've taken a very whole team approach, what we now call complete team. And so imagine you have some number of business people, maybe not a whole lot, sitting around a table with a group of folks who can actually build the product. And if building that product comes out of this conversation about what we're trying to achieve and how we can go about doing it, then both sides learn a bit about the other. I want my development folks, the people that Scrum would call the development team, to learn what the business problem is we're trying to solve and why we're trying to solve it. And that the business people learn enough about how we're going to go about doing it to be able to contribute at some level. If you take that group and turn them into a mob in the Woody Zool form of mob, and then they just build this together, then after a while you're going to stop having ideas only coming from the business people about business things, and technical people about technical things, and that knowledge will spread around. And I think that's a more modern way of thinking about how you solve this problem. That I want business people and technical people working together on the same team. And in our current formulation of this, there are no titles beyond member of the team. Some of us have a background in business. Some of us has a background in programming. Some have a background in testing. Some have background in analysis. It doesn't matter after a short period of time, where good ideas come from wherever good ideas come from. And that could be a person who was a tester in background, but have a wonderful idea about this business problem we're trying to solve. Why lose that? And so I think part of it is breaking down those artificial boundaries that we put in place 20 some years ago, because we did not know how not to then. Today we've learned how to get away from some of that. And so, yeah, I'd like to break that down.
Now, I think that at the same time, that's a very entrepreneurial approach to how you would do this product development. It is a small team approach, if you will. I wish that screen would not have Chet on it right now. If you look at a larger scale situation, I agree kind of with the questioner that there's little known about how to really do the business side of Agile. There are some interesting books to read. Melissa Perry's book is an interesting read, for example. But there are, to my way of thinking, the limits of my reading, there are not answers to how would you make a big company do this. We begin to see how we would do it in a room with 10 or 20 people, but we don't have answers to that. It seems clear that the idea of a giant product plan with all of these slots set into it isn't quite the answer. But that scheme doesn't work very well in any other mode of operation either. So we could probably afford to get rid of that. It probably makes sense to say things analogous to what SAFe says, really, and to what LeSS says, which is that you've got a high level view and high level problems, and then you break it down. But I don't know of anybody that's got what I would call a good answer on how you do that. I think that's because, in its own way, defining and creating a product is more creative than software development. The thing about software development is by the time we get around to doing it, we understand so much about the problem and so much about how to do software development that it's very creative and it's very difficult to do, and only a few of us can really do it very well. But it's nothing compared to sitting at home and imagining a product and turning it into Google. So I think it's a hard problem, and I think it's an unsolved problem.
Yep, I think it's a fair answer. I mean, just add, so oftentimes we consider business as a part of the agile transformation, and absolutely so, it shouldn't be left behind. IT only will just get us so far, but in all fairness, leaving behind such important organizational domains as HR, budgeting, finance, vendor management, site strategies is also, not going to produce long-lasting, sustainable results. Those are meant to be a part of organizational front-to-back agility, and oftentimes companies forget about that.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's one, I have a few questions that I cut and pasted in Notepad. There's one that stands out that I'm looking for the ones that are crisp, that could be easily presented to you. Can you talk about the role of leadership and how you work with leadership in your coaching? Because they usually hold the keys to addressing the organizational dysfunction. And kind of it's kind of related to one of the previously submitted, but this is it. Leadership, coaching of leadership, etc.
I'm troubled by that question in a couple of ways. I think we all have a vision of management versus leadership, and that managers tell you what to do and leaders pull you out of, pull out of you what you've got, and that's good. And I think that there's a lot of almost an infinity of material that you can study and read about being more like a leader and less like a manager. And I don't think any of it is unique to Agile. I think it could be argued that a good leader is more likely to almost accidentally create an Agile organization because they will be drawing out of the team instead of pushing down to the team. They, of course, get other benefits just that come from the fact that you are, as a leader, you're more likely to have followers than you are as a manager. As a manager, you have employees who resent you, and as a leader, you have people who will follow you even if you go over the cliff, which sometimes leaders do. So the leadership notion to me is very independent of the Agile topic that we're talking about. Now, I have worked at the top of organizations in my own work, and I have coached organizations clear up to the top of the management hierarchy, at least at the level of VP marketing, VP development, stuff like that. And my finding is, if they're not ready, if they aren't already wanting to do this and wanting to get more from their people, not in the sense of driving them, but in the sense of having this notion that I know these people would really do good stuff if I could just set them free. And if they're not ready to hear the story of Agile, there is no hope. And if they are ready, you scarcely have to coach them at all, so much as encourage them and say, yes, this is working, try that, do that. Yeah, right, back off, do this. To me, particularly since I have the luxury of not doing anything if I don't want to, and I don't, I choose not to work with an organization that isn't ready at the top. That to me, it's not worth it to try to change those people. If somebody's drifted to the top of an organization and doesn't understand leadership, it's probably too late.
I think that maybe the first question one should ask is, how do you expect your job to change based on what we're going to be doing here? And sometimes that's a question that seems completely out of place to them, because why would my job change if the people down there on the ground are going to be working differently? Because we've gone through 4 or 5 transformational things since I've been here, and I've never changed my job. And that may explain why they've gone through 4 or 5 and nothing's changed. Change has to happen throughout the entire organization. And if folks at the managerial leadership level aren't expecting their job to change because of this, that probably means that no real change will happen within the organization. And so that at that level, it's okay, what are you going to be doing differently? Because you keep doing the same things, those folks will have to do the same thing in order to align with you. And that's just going to kill whatever we're doing. So
It's probably a good, this is something that I actually never thought about. So we often make a clear delineation between being a manager and being a leader. So just because someone is higher paid and has a rank, it does not necessarily mean they're a good leader. They could be a great, manager, or at least successful for themselves manager, but that's a leader. But I wasn't actually something that just struck me what you said, both of you guys said. So if a person who is in a senior position, if his or her daily routine, daily job does not change, then that's a good indicator that what was done was effectively, I call it blessing in spirit and in slogans, the town hall style. You go figure this out, we bless you, please become more agile, as long as it does not, does not materialize in my own backyard.
As long as what I see doesn't change, I'll be happy with this transformation.
That's right. So that's a good, nothing changes at the top echelon.
No, I think there is a bit of a paradox, though, that one wants to keep in mind. Somebody just posted waterfall on top, agile at the bottom. I think that there is an element of truth to that, which is to say that the rate of change at the bottom is going to be faster than the rate of change at the top. Somebody at the top of Ford Motor Company is talking about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles and fuel economy and major topics like that. And somebody at the bottom is trying to make those things work. They're going to be thrashing a lot more than the top. So there is I think a tendency for things to move more in a more languid, stretched out style at the top, because you're taking a higher flight level. You're at 30,000 feet instead of 1,000 feet. The Earth goes by more slowly at 30,000 feet. And yet, the way those people do their management, the way they do the way they work with their reports has to change. It has to be more drawing up and less pushing down. But the pace may really not change. I don't think you really want Ford Motor Company changing their mind every 20 minutes. I don't think that will help. But people down at the bottom who are developing the software that's going to drive your Ford around town without you, they probably should be changing their mind every 20 minutes. And
I think that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we were
go
saying.
ahead. Somebody go ahead.
And I think that means that those folks have to be ahead of us. We should be changing what we do in reaction to the fact that the management, the leadership of the organization has moved to a different kind of place, and we're rushing to catch up with them, as opposed to trying to drag them along with us. I think they probably have to leapfrog and be out ahead, start asking better questions in order to get the folks down in the organization to start working in a better way, to come up with questions that they were not capable of answering before, as opposed to us generating new information and trying to get past the impedance mismatch of them wanting to have the exact same report that they had in 1990 today. And so that's I think that's the thing that probably tells us.
Thanks, Chet. So, John, we got like maybe 3-4 minutes before we have to wrap. We're wrapping just a few minutes before the hour. There's one question that was someone pinged me on LinkedIn. I picked it up, and I'm going to kind of wrap it with maybe some of your Chet, your experiences when you were set with Craig and his course. I'm going to, if I recall correctly, and I think I do, Craig often mentions this. He uses this quote, and he actually plays the video of John Carter. Resistance to change. I think many people have seen it, right? So it's very easy to spot someone who is explicitly resistant to change. Those people we know of. It's much more difficult to deal with people that are implicitly resistant. We don't know what they're up against. They can say yes, 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 and once you turn them back on them, they're gonna just say no, no, no. So, and then the other thing that John Carter says in some of his writing is that in order to avoid this inherent resistance to change, you have to find, it's best to be done in those cases where there is an urgency to change. There's a state of urgency. So I'm kind of wondering, so we don't want cataclysmic events. We don't want Lehman Brothers effects. We don't want coronavirus effects to change organizations fundamentally. We don't want massive drastic layoffs. We don't want organizations dramatically lose their intellectual asset because something dramatic happened. But what if not? Then maybe perhaps being more lean and losing organizational you know, organizational weight and organizational cumbersomeness more methodically, more proactive, as opposed to waiting for that crazy cataclysmic event where you absolutely must drop the that weight, and otherwise you're not going to survive. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you see that kind of urgency within younger organizations, mostly regardless of size. Organizations probably like Google, Amazon, Tesla, those kinds of organizations that are pretty young and have been structured in such a way that we expect change to be happening at a fairly reasonable pace, are going to be able to continue down that way. I think they will probably not calcify. But you have organizations that come out of the Alfred Sloan approach of 15 layers of management to ensure that we never make a mistake here at General Motors, by making sure that nobody ever does anything. So you want organizations that expect folks to learn things, and some of that learning will be good, and some of it will teach us something else. There's the famous old story from Thomas Watson, the president of IBM, who one of his employees made some error that cost the company $1 million back at a time when $1 million was interesting, and had to go see the president of the company, go see Mr. Watson, and he came in just absolutely dripping fear as to what was going to happen to him. And Watson talked to him, and the guy, finally he said, what's the matter? You seem really afraid. And he said, I'm afraid you're going to fire me. And he said, why on earth would I fire you? I just spent $1 million teaching you something very important. And so we should think about things like that we're spending money teaching people valuable lessons at an organization, and we shouldn't think that that's a waste. The learning is what the important part is, and you overcome the cost if you're doing it well. Organizations have to have that sort of approach, not that every 10 cents we lose is a loss to the company. Did we learn? And that's the important thing. That's an important differentiator, I think, is organizations that set out to learn things and organizations that set out to ensure that they become impervious to learning.
Thank you, Chet. Ron, any wrapping statements from you before we wrap? This has been.
I think we're good.
You have nothing? Okay. Okay.
We're done.
Chet spoken on your behalf as well. So before we wrap, folks, I want to thank you all for joining, and especially the speakers, the presenters, Ron and Chet. My sincere thanks to you. My sincere appreciation for taking the time and speaking to the audience. I'll try to record it and have it available to others who could not attend. And I'm happy to have you here and help you grow the community. And hopefully, maybe I'll see you at the podium again and sometime in the nearby future. And you have been a great influence on me for many years, both of you. So personal thanks.
Well, I'll see you next week.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Thank you indeed, Chad. We'll see you then.
Okay.
Right. Hopefully see you soon. Cheers, folks.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.